Welcome. Sorry, I just got the notes about recording. Hello, everyone. My name is Vicki Ellingrod. I'm the Senior Associate Dean here at the College of Pharmacy, and I want to welcome you to a very special episode of In the Interim. Tonight with us, we have Dr. Rebecca Smith, who is originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, where she received her Bachelor's of Science from the University of Arkansas. She then went and received her PharmD degree from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock, and then completed a PGY2 pharmacy residency at Regional One Health in Memphis, Tennessee. After completing her PGY1 then, she went on and completed a PGY2 residency in critical care at the University of Kentucky. And when she was done with her PGY2, then she accepted a position back in at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, working with the trauma, emergency general surgery, and neurocritical care services. And so we're really excited to have her here with us tonight. Unfortunately, for probably not the greatest reason to be invited to be part of a webinar, because the topic tonight is sexual harassment in pharmacy. And before we get to hearing Becky's story, I just wanted to share a couple slides because while I think a lot of women in pharmacy, upon hearing the stories about sexual harassment, were not necessarily surprised. I was actually curious to find out, kind of what beyond my sphere of knowledge was out there regarding sexual harassment in medical professionals in general. And so I went into the literature like I tend to do when I'm looking for data. And not surprisingly, there was actually a fair amount of literature out there looking at sexual harassment in science as well as in medicine. And I think these are two very similar things, but they're also a little bit different in that the first study here, that these are two of the most recent ones, was talking about women who are in different research laboratories or women in science and the struggles they face in terms of being in these workplaces and sexual harassment. But then also this study that was done by Dr. Jagsey here from the University of Michigan they looked at the entire medical health system, and they found that in particular, sexual harassment is happening here at the University of Michigan as well. And while I knew of this study, it still makes me incredibly sad that we have to have this conversation, but I think it's also a really important conversation to have. I then turned to pharmacy to see if there was anything different in pharmacy. And the literature is actually a little bit different in pharmacy in that there is more literature around pharmacists in different care settings, and not only sexual harassment from other practitioners, but also sexual harassment from patients as well. And so this research really talked not only about the sexual harassment that pharmacists might experience, but also technicians. And I think this is a really great example for those of us within an academic health center and within the College of Pharmacy to really acknowledge that it's not just the pharmacist, being it a male or female pharmacist, that is experiencing sexual harassment. It also is our technicians, our staff, and then unfortunately our students as well. I think the one thing that was a little bit different than the medical literature is that the pharmacy literature is taking the next step in looking at possible solutions to sexual harassment within our profession. And the two literature examples on the bottom really talk about how do we address that, and then for men in particular that might be uncomfortable with mentoring female mentees, how they can do that in appropriate fashion. And I think this is probably really great reading for everyone because one of the reasons this has been able to go on so long is because of people being ashamed or being fearful and not really sharing their stories. And so that brings me now to our speaker. And so Rebecca really started this off on Twitter which is kind of an interesting way, but a very effective way, because she's had some tweets that have been viral. And rather than me tell her story, I'm now going to turn it over to her and have her tell you about kind of what happened and what led her to go to Twitter as a social media platform to really bring light to this problem.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, and again for asking me to speak today. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time to join and to listen to my personal experiences with sexual harassment. I'm not sure if you all are active on Twitter and have seen my tweets where I finally decided to speak out about this, or have heard the podcast that was just linked for you guys that I recently recorded with several other female pharmacists who experienced sexual harassment from the same individual that I did or not, but they are linked for you. And I'm sure that those slides will be sent out so that you can access those at your leisure. My personal story started when I was a pharmacy student. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to pursue a career in critical care, and that meant 2 years of residency post-graduation. So during school, I was very involved in student organizations and on research projects, trying to make myself stand out as a good residency candidate. I also chose elective classes that focused on residency prep and critical care, which were both coordinated by one of our college's newest professors who was fresh out of his own critical care residency at that time. I had met him before as he was a research advisor and mentor to several girls in the class above me, but I really got to know him through the electives and through other classes that he taught. I would say that he quickly became a mentor to me and portrayed himself as someone who only wanted the best for me and would be an invaluable resource for pretty much all things residency related. And I really considered myself lucky to have him as a mentor and to have that relationship with him, because I knew that he had a lot of good connections. And so in the beginning, our mentor-mentee relationship was very appropriate. He, again, just seemed to want the best for me and wanted to help me get a residency. However, our relationship quickly progressed to flirting. He would text me like when I was giving a presentation and tell me how amazing my outfit looked on me. He always addressed me as dear and never really by my name. He started to text me pretty much daily. So lots of flirting started to happen. And at the time, I kind of laughed it off because I knew, or I thought, that I needed those electives and potentially his connections to help me get a residency. As you all probably already know, pharmacy is a small world and critical care pharmacy is even smaller. And so although it's important to stand out on your residency applications, it's also kind of about who you know. And this professor made it very clear that he knew many, many preceptors and directors at many programs across the country, and that he would be sure to talk to them about me. So I just brushed all the flirting off at this point. I didn't really think that much of it. I knew that he sent the same kind of flirty text messages to other girls and that they continued to work with him on projects and manuscripts, so I did too. However, he added me on Snapchat and the messages became really inappropriate. Pictures started to be sent that I did not ask for and they were not reciprocated. And I remember asking him several times to stop sending messages like that. And I just want you all to have a little background. So during this time, I was either in a serious relationship, engaged, or married. So I did not want these messages. I did not want these pictures, but they just kind of kept coming. So at one point, I straight up told him that he made female students uncomfortable, that he needed to stop being so inappropriate with students or he was going to end up getting in trouble. And anytime I would say things like that, he would apologize. He would revert back to completely normal mentor conversations, but that never really lasted more than a couple of days. So this strange dynamic kind of continued throughout my pharmacy school career, with brief periods of appropriateness intertwined with a majority of inappropriate messages. However, during my P4 year, he finally left my College of Pharmacy. And at that point, I pretty much thought, I'm free. I don't need him anymore. I've already matched with a wonderful PGY1 program. I didn't need his connections anymore, and I could end this relationship. However, only a few months into my PGY1, he texted me a screenshot of a conversation between him and an RPD at a Critical Care PGY2 program that I was applying to. and my heart just kind of sank. Essentially, I was back at square one. I remember just being so mad that I again had to be nice to him because I needed his connections to get a good critical care residency. But that was my reality. So the relationship started back up again and quickly progressed to being inappropriate. Then, after I matched for my Crit Care PGY2, I again thought I was free of him. If he texted me like during that time and was appropriate, I would respond. And if he was being weird, I would just ignore him. But for the most part, his texts became very infrequent, which I was happy about. About halfway through my PGY2 year, I started looking for jobs post residency. And he again slithered back into my life, saying that he knew all these people at all these places that I could apply to and that I should apply to, that they really respected him and listened to his opinions. And so I felt like I had to be nice to him again, and that I couldn't just ignore his messages anymore. And at this point, the harassment had followed me from pharmacy school to PGY1 to PGY2, and then now like sort of into my post-residency career. So 5 years of on again, off again harassment from this individual. And it even continued after I got my job. So I've been in my position for about a year and a half, and he last texted me earlier this year. I think it was June or July. And that's when I finally blocked him. And it really wasn't until recently, late August to be exact, that I felt comfortable enough in my professional career to finally speak up against him. Honestly, it was all sparked because I was told that he was starting the same thing or starting to do the same thing with a P4 at a completely different college of pharmacy. And I was so tired of him continuing this disgusting behavior and getting away with it because he was well known. He published a lot. He's very involved in a bunch of national organizations. But just hearing that he was doing this again made me so angry that I finally decided to say something on Twitter. And once I did, dozens of girls actually came out and spoke against him as well, which I totally did not expect to happen. I honestly didn't even expect anyone to see my tweets. I think I had about 100 followers-ish when I tweeted those things. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but they did, and now we're here. So when I look back to when I was a student, I just really wish that I had spoken up and said something to someone. However, I wasn't really sure where to turn. I knew it was happening to other girls and I confided in them. And honestly, we kind of just assumed that the faculty members at our school knew and either didn't care, or if they did care, they just didn't say anything. And again, that's my mindset as a student. But now that I'm kind of back here and I'm a faculty member, I know that that's not the case and that they truly did not know that it was happening. So I really wish that I had just spoken up, but again, didn't know where to turn. So as a student, especially one who is residency bound, you obviously want to get close to your professors and your preceptors. You want good recommendations, both formally and informally. However, like all the things that I've described to you and like the way that I have felt these past 5 years like are not okay. And you shouldn't have to go through those things just to gain someone's favor. And if it is happening to you or has ever happened to you, I truly encourage you to speak up to someone, anyone, so that it doesn't end up consuming you. And hopefully you can, by speaking up, you can prevent it from happening to someone else. So, I mean, it's been 5 years since it started with me. And as I said, when I finally did say something on Twitter, there were so many girls that came forward, and I remember feeling like guilt because if I had just said something earlier, then maybe all these other girls wouldn't have been affected by this individual. And so again, like I really hope that this never happens to any of you all. And I know this was like a really quick summary of my experiences, but it happens, and it's not some sort of like voodoo thing. Like it does happen, and I hope it doesn't happen to you all. But if it does, I want you to be aware of your resources. And so I think that Dr. Ellingrod is going to go into those resources for you all next. But that's pretty much my story. So just want to thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing. I forgot to mention that if anyone has any comments or wants to ask any questions, you can use the raise your hand function. Julian, who's helping us in the background, then we'll unmute you, or if you want to put something in the chat. But I think there's a couple of things that really resonated with what you said for me personally, in that oftentimes it has to do about relationships. And I think, most of the harassment that I've faced has fortunately not necessarily been in colleges of pharmacy, but when I go to professional meetings, and being, a pharmacist who's in a medical world and certainly research, there are people and there's research groups that I need to collaborate with, and they'll have connections. And though, I think that it really boils down to making that choice between putting up with behavior that's not really appropriate and getting the resources that you need. So there's a question here. If you don't mind answering, what was one of the biggest factors of why you decided to speak up?
Okay, yeah. So, and I kind of briefly mentioned it, but I guess I finally decided to speak up because I felt comfortable in my career. And at this point, like, I know I don't need his connections anymore because I am pretty solid in my job. And just hearing that he was continuing to do this to other students who would have been back in the same position that I was, and they probably wouldn't speak up about it. I just felt compelled to speak up at that point and to, I don't know, call him out basically and make sure that he stops doing it.
Yeah, and so now that you are a faculty member yourself and you've kind of seen the other side of it, have you thought about what colleges of pharmacy, like what would be best practices to make sure that students know that we're here for them, and if something happens, to speak up?
Yes. Well, it's kind of an ongoing thing, like I'm sure it is there as well. But personally, for myself, in my syllabus or syllabi for my rotations and for my classes that I teach in, I've added a little blurb about my office being a safe space. You can come and talk to me about anything. And if you want to report something, I will definitely help you do that. If you just want me to be a sounding board for you, I can do that as well. Which that is specific to my College of Pharmacy. Like, we're not technically mandated reporters of these types of situations unless some sort of abuse is involved. But that's something that I've done personally. And then I'm kind of working with our dean to try to revamp our sexual harassment policy. Like, as students, you get the Title IX training and you're just like, yeah, this is never going to happen. Like, you do the little module or whatever, and then you kind of forget about it, or you just move on. You don't think it's going to happen. But we really want to hone in on these things happen. And these are the steps that you can take to report these kind of things. So that's kind of what we're doing here. What are you guys doing at Michigan?
Very, very similar. The university, as we talked a couple weeks ago, has had some pretty high profile cases of sexual harassment that clearly were a failing of our system. And so, so because of that, they've changed the process about who is a mandatory reporter and who is not. And we're still trying to get clarity on that. So pretty much anyone who has like a dean title or, an official administrative title is a mandatory reporter. And what that basically means is that if someone comes to us and said, hey, this person is harassing me, we are required to report that to the university. And that seems really harsh, but the reason that we're required to do that is exactly the situation that Becky described here, in that if you have someone on campus who's doing serial sort of harassment and assaulting, having that go up to one place allows the university to understand it, versus one person finding out and not saying anything, another person finding out and not saying anything. And so, however, I think it's really important that our college have safe places on campus for students to talk about these issues, because sometimes it takes you a while to sort all this out and think about exactly what you want to do and what you want to say and what your options are. And so, you know, we have an embedded counselor who's very definitely a safe person. And then, you know, any of our faculty, and if our faculty know that they have to be mandatory reporters, they should disclose that and work with you if you do report. So that's kind of what how we're taking it. But again, getting clarity around who is actually a mandatory reporter and is not is kind of where we are right now. So. There's another question here about how would you encourage individuals to report when there's possibly negative social and professional implications?
Yeah, that is a tricky question because again, that's kind of why I didn't report for so long. Again, being on the flip side of it, like if I hope that if students here or anywhere are going through this, that they will reach out to either someone at their institution, or if they're here at UAMS, I hope that they will reach out to me and I will, you know, help protect them as much as I can. But that's what's hard about this situation is there are potential implications, and I don't want anyone that's a victim of these of this harassment to be discouraged in reporting it. I mean, if it's truly something that you feel strongly about and that it's affecting your school or your work life or anything like that, it's worth reporting, even if there are implications. But I know that it's hard too. So
it's very hard, and I also think that speaks to the importance of actually having a safe space to go and talk about those, and kind of a sounding board, and to kind of process what those feelings are, and kind of then allow you to make the appropriate next steps in reporting it. So I guess Karen Ferris, who's one of our senior faculty here, has her hand up. And so Julian, if you want to unmute Karen, she can ask her question.
Hello, I'm going to assume that you guys can hear me.
We can.
I just want to thank you so much for telling this story. It's incredibly sad that you have had to live with this situation, and I think kind of probably felt isolated about it, and that makes me really sad, and it's heartbreaking as a senior faculty. That said, I'm so thankful that you're here. And so I have two questions for you. One, the second one you can just tell me to hush, and we don't even have to answer it. But the first one, what has pharmacy done as a profession to support you is my first question. And then my second question is, are you aware of what his current academic institution or setting has done to address this inappropriate behavior, reprehensible behavior? And if you don't know that, that's fine. But what has pharmacy done to support you?
Hey, yeah, great questions. And I mean, thank you for joining and listening to my story. I hope you got something out of it and are able to help, you know, future students that are going through this. But so what has pharmacy done as a profession to help me? Honestly, the amount of support I have gotten is just insane. Within, I don't know, 24 hours of my first post, like the presidents and higher ups of organizations were reaching out to me. They were saying, I mean, the crazy thing in all of this is that I still have not named him. People just know who he is, which speaks to his character and his reputation, I guess. So people knew who it was about automatically. And so many people reached out to me and they said, hey, I have connections in ASHP. I have connections in SCCM. Like, I'll get you in touch with all these people. You know, I think the best person in all of this, and like my basically new best friend, is Brittany Bizzle, who is a pharmacist at University of Kentucky Healthcare. And I knew her during residency, but throughout all of this, she's been amazing. And she kind of just assured me, like, we will protect you. Like, we're going to like protect your integrity. Like, we're not going to let him come after you. We're not going to let him retaliate, you know, as best as we can. Like, so don't be afraid to get up and speak out about this, and be afraid of the negative things that could come out of it. Like, what if he sues me? What if this happens? What if, you know? So there's so many things that even now, like that I'm not a student or a resident, like there are things that I'm having to think about. But I would just say like overall, the profession of pharmacy has been amazing in reaching out to me and, asking my opinions like, hey, this is our sexual harassment policy for XYZ organization. Like, what can we do to make it better? Like, how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And so like those kinds of conversations are still happening and probably will continue to happen until we get like more of a universal reporting mechanism in place and better, as in like real sexual harassment policies in these organizations to protect our learners. So the support has been amazing. I will say that. As far as his current academic institution, I will say what I think I'm allowed to say, in that they take these matters of sexual allegations of sexual harassment very seriously, and they are doing everything within their power to make sure that the appropriate actions are taken. And I can tell you more offline maybe, but that's what I will say right now.
So we have a couple other questions here that kind of have a theme around them. So for someone who's wishing to build professional relationships or stronger connections, how do you protect yourself in your career from backlash? I know that was most likely partly why you didn't necessarily speak up to begin with.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, this individual was very well known, very involved in critical care pharmacy. And as this was kind of happening, like when I was a student and when I was a resident, what I did was I didn't get involved. And that, like looking back, like that's not the answer. Like I probably kept so many opportunities for myself and not getting involved just because I didn't want to work with individuals like him or himself. So I don't know, it was hard, especially when they're in your little subset of pharmacy to still stay involved. And so really like before I started speaking out, I didn't do anything to protect my career because I just, I wasn't getting involved, and that's just the way that it was. Now that I have spoken out and I've talked to some of these CEOs and presidents of the organizations, they're just kind of like, I hope that you give us another shot. And I am trying to get involved now. So I don't know, that probably doesn't really answer your question, but that's kind of what I did as it was happening. I just kind of secluded myself away, and I was involved in my residency program, but just not nationally as far as like the professional organizations. But
yeah, I think, one of the things that I've kind of done over the years, and with more experience, you have a little bit more security, to make these decisions. And so it's very challenging early on. And I think that's why we need to have more programs like this and kind of bring light of day to this issue. But, I'll be at meetings and I'll see something. I'll be like, maybe why don't, you want to come over here with me instead of talking to this person over here, or I'll try to engage. I'm like, I get what I'm seeing, but I just want to let you know that that's probably not a good idea to do this, or this has been my experience with this person. And oftentimes people, especially if alcohol is flowing at meetings, they are making bad choices, but most of the time they're very, like, oh yeah, thanks. So it's a balance between these sorts of things. So if you would have, I'm assuming when you were a student, you didn't really understand the difference between mandatory reporters and non-mandatory reporters. Mm-hmm. What do you think? What do you think if you would have had a courage and reported it to someone who was a mandatory reporter and they said that they needed to report it? Have you thought about how that might have gone differently, or if that would have swayed you either way?
I think so. I wasn't totally sure of like the whole process of it as a student. I think I was afraid that if I told anybody that it would progress to this huge legal issue, and I just didn't want to be a part of that. Like I didn't want to call attention to myself. Like even after he left my institution, if he reached out to me and was appropriate, like I responded back because I didn't want him to think that I was the reason he was gone, So it's just, I don't know, it's hard. It is
really hard. It's really hard. And it's with, experience and with feeling a little bit more secure in your career that you're able to think a little bit more freely about these sorts of things. And so I understand that. There's one, I'm going to take one last question here. It talks about male colleagues. And again, I'm going to remind everyone that even though, pharmacy is primarily female and this happens more commonly to females, sexual harassment can also happen to men as well. But so what could we put into practice in our rotations? You talked about changes to your syllabus, making sure people understand that it's a safe space. We don't know what's necessarily going on in our college because we're all kind of in our own little silos and there's other HR issues. So the question is, what can male faculty or male pharmacy mentors do to help eliminate this?
Also a great question. And I had several male preceptors and mentors reach out to me via Twitter about the same kind of issue. Like, well, first off, they all wanted to know who it was so they could address it themselves or make sure that they're not engaging in relationships with that individual. And then like, what can they do to help? And I just want to start by saying, like, I don't want to ever discourage a male preceptor or individual to not be a mentor to males and female students or residents. That's not the goal of any of this. And that I just want to make sure that that's very clear. So I have some of the best male mentors ever. I mean, they are completely appropriate with me. I've never felt uncomfortable around them. And that is a doable relationship. Like it's doable. So I don't want to discourage anybody from seeking out those sorts of mentee mentor relationships, because there are appropriate ways to go about it. And really, Dr. Hill's paper that you showed earlier about the relationships between the female mentees and male mentors is a wonderful paper. I actually plan on printing it out for everyone at our college just so that they have it. But what can they do? And I think what can you do? It doesn't really depend on your gender. So both female and male faculty members and mentors, I think you just have to be very cognizant. So like I probably hinted about things to my mentors here. And by probably, I mean I did. So like I would, someone would say, hey, you should do a project with him. And I said, well, I just don't really know if I want to do that. I've kind of heard some things. And they said, oh, well, like he publishes everything. So if you just work with him, you'll get a publication out of it. It'll be great. Your CV will, benefit from this relationship. But I was still hesitant about it. And so like thinking back, I'm like, why didn't they pick that up? I didn't want to do it. They had to push me to do it. So I think trying to like pick up on things like that and just honestly having an open dialogue with your mentee. So being upfront, like, hey, this is now an issue that is kind of gaining more awareness, whether it's through this or through other people speaking out. And I just want you to know, if you ever experience this, like you can come and talk to me about it, So I think starting those conversations is going to be something that, again, both male and female faculty members can do to try to help with these things. And then again, just like listening to the whispers. So if you keep hearing something, whether it's at your institution or at a different institution, especially in critical care, we have many projects that span multiple institutions. And so it doesn't have to be someone like where you're working. I mean, it could be, but it could be somewhere else. Like if you're hearing things like over and over again, like he's kind of weird or she's really weird, or they're like kind of touchy-feely, like listen to those things. Like they're not fake, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Like try to investigate those, like really listen to your mentees and hear what they're saying, and then don't just brush it under the rug, like ask more questions. Well, what do you mean by that? Or, can you tell me more about that? So I think that that's moving forward what everyone should be doing. That's what I try to do, at least with my students, like just bringing it up, even though it's uncomfortable. It's still uncomfortable for me, even though I've lived it for so long. But just having those conversations, I think, is where we should start.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you, and I think too, maybe making sure that we're using clear language around it, because I think back to one person in particular that is someone I avoid at meetings now. That person was initially described to me as a silly goose that liked to go out, and I was like, okay, I don't really know. I realized what that meant after a couple incidences. So I don't use that language when I describe this person to others. So I think it's being clear. So before we end today, I'm going to share my screen again. And because I did want to provide some resources. Okay, no, and now it's not letting me go. Okay. What is going on? Stop sharing. Hold on. Sorry. Oh, and now I lost that. Okay. Let me go here. See if I can share my screen again. Sorry. We are reaching the end of my technology acumen. Okay, so these are some different myths that Caitlin Ferguson was kind enough to go look for me surrounding sexual harassment requires touching. It actually doesn't. It doesn't have to have any physical component whatsoever. That is always verbal, and that's also not necessarily talking. Is certainly part of it, but it doesn't always involve just talking. That it can't be sexual harassment, or it can't be harassment if we were only joking. Well, it only kind of depends if both parties are in on the joke, and that isn't true for many people. If it was a compliment, it's not harassment. That true is false. Again, if the other person is not feeling that this was a compliment, then it does become harassment. And I've tried really hard in my own personal life. I do not comment on anyone's physical appearance anymore, male, female, anyone. I don't do that. And there's many false reports of sexual assault, especially when the victim and the assailant know each other. And the fact is that that's not actually true. It's actually very low incidence of false reports. And so in terms of what we have here on campus for students, you can go to sexualmisconduct.umich.edu, and there's student resources. There's a Sexual Assault Prevention and Awareness Center that you can go to confidentially. There's also our Counseling and Psychological Services, or CAPS, of which we have Jamie Yang, who is our CAPS counselor in the College of Pharmacy. You can contact her or CAPS for free confidential services. Same thing with the Office of Ombuds. This is a free confidential resource for U of M students. For faculty and staff, we have resources as well. The same thing, SAPAC. We also have Faculty and Staff Counseling and Consultation Office, provides some short-term counseling and coaching. And then the Michigan Medicine has the same thing, Office of Counseling and Workplace Resilience, as well as the Faculty and Staff Ombuds offices. So those are all resources that we can go to have discussions about something that may have happened to us. And it's my understanding these are all safe, confidential. These are not mandatory reporting. If you are ready to report, though, you can talk to, I know for sure, anyone who is in an administrative role, and we can help walk you through that process. You can also go to the Sexual Misconduct at umich.edu reporting process to get started. It'll tell you how to make a report. If you do end up talking to someone and it turns out that they are a mandatory reporter and we do have to report, when you get contacted, you do not have to talk to that office if you are not comfortable. It is not a forced process that if you would talk to me and I report that you absolutely have to talk back to this office, that is completely up to you. It's just that I, as a mandatory reporter, then do have to report to the university that this is happening. And so the last slide here, Rebecca's showing, is her email address. So thank you so much for putting that in the chat and for also sharing. And thank you so much, Becky, for sharing your story today. I wish we did not have to have this conversation, but I think that by having this conversation now, we can bring a little bit more light to this issue and prevent future instances. And with that, any last remarks before we sign off?
Just thank you for having me. If you have any questions at all, feel free to email me or find me on Twitter. My DMs are open. Yeah,
she actually does tweet science on Twitter too. So follow her. I follow her, and so there are other parts to Twitter as well. So thank you again so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to Dean Mueller for allowing me to take over his interim conversation. And I believe this is the last one we're going to have for the semester. I hope everyone who's traveling home at the end of this week is safe in that they quarantine and wear a mask and wash your hands. Thank you all very much.